The rain hammered both electric Ford Explorers. The air had grown stale, thick with the scent of ionizing ozone and the nervous sweat of its occupants. Dr. Alan Grant sat in the front passenger seat, his eyes fixed on the dash. The monitor in the center dash was dead. The primary power grid had suffered a catastrophic cascade failure. Beside him, Dr. Ian Malcolm leaned in to get a closer look. He was not looking at the rain. He was focused on the glass of water on the dashboard. "Do you feel that?" Malcolm's voice was a low, melodic baritone, vibrating with a strange sort of intellectual anticipation. "The concentric circles in the water, that's a rhythmic impact. It's a point source vibration." Alan didn't respond immediately. He was processing. It was rhythmic, yes, but it was also heavy. It suggested a large mass moving with a distinct bipedal gait. In the second Ford Explorer, young Tim Murphy peered through the night vision goggles he had scavenged from under the seat. The green luminescence of the screen reflected in his wide eyes. Gennaro, unfazed by either Lex or Tim, sat there in the front passenger seat with his eyes closed. Lex sat there relaxed and watching the rain belt the large fern leaves. Alan looked toward the fence. The large pylons and thick electrified wires, designed to hold 10,000 volts of deterrent, stood silent and wet in the dark night sky. To his shock, he could barely see. He strained his eyes, which gained Ian's attention. "What do you see?" he asked. Alan turned to Ian and whispered, "The goat is gone." Ian's face went cold for a second and questioned, "You mean eaten?" Only a bloody scrap of tether remained on the central sensor plate. The humidity in the tropical storm was unbearable and making Donald Gennaro, the legal counsel for InGen's investors, sweat profusely. Leaning against the back seat, young Tim Murphy sat focused on the tree line with the night vision goggles strapped to his head. He was scanning the edges of the paddock for any type of movement. "I can't see anything," Tim whispered. "That's because there's nothing to see," Gennaro barked, though his voice lacked conviction. "It's a lizard. It's cold. It's probably sleeping." At that moment, a massive impact tremor shook the ground. Not the sharp crack of thunder, but a deep, resonant thump that seemed to originate from the earth itself. Then the impact came once again, even closer this time. The explorers rocked once more. Something large was coming their way. Then it was all quiet. The only sound was the heavy rain hitting the cars, then the call of the goat bleating for help. Then nothing once again. Suddenly, seemingly out of nowhere, a goat's leg, severed cleanly at the hip, hit the glass sunroof of the lead vehicle with a wet, heavy slap. Gennaro's eyes bulged. The thin veneer of the high-powered lawyer shattered instantly. Then he seen it. Not 20 yards away and standing 15 feet tall. It was huge, it was massive. It was the bloody head of the T-Rex peering over the fence line and down at the tour cars. Gennaro's thoughts were not that of the children. He was panicked and now breathing heavily. He looked through the other window and seen a small structure. It was a small, thatched restroom on the other side of the tour track, just down the road. His new adrenaline-fueled state drew the full attention of the children. Lex leaned forward and asked if he was okay. She had not noticed the Tyrannosaur yet, nor had Tim, though she did notice that Gennaro had peed himself. So Donald Gennaro's demeanor had them worried. He cried, "I'm not staying here." He gasped. He threw the door open, the rain instantly soaking his suit, and bolted toward the thatched restroom. "He left us," Tim said, his voice trembling. Alan and Ian saw Gennaro's silhouette exit the front vehicle and running away down the road. "What the hell is he doing?" Alan asked. "I'm not sure, but this is a hell of a time to use the bathroom," Ian replied. Their attention now on the fence noticed the massive box-like head of the Tyrannosaurus, biting the cables and pulling. The heavy steel cables were no longer taut, and then, with a sound like a gunshot, the primary tension wire snapped. The fence groaned, the concrete footings cracking under the sheer mechanical force of the animal's strength. And then the cables snapped in its mouth. It was now free of its enclosure. The Tyrannosaurus Rex claimed the road. It was a 7-ton engine of evolution, its skin a mottled mosaic of browns and deep greens, glistening under the rain. Lex and Tim sat still, not for their own safety or knowledge of the Tyrannosaur's eyesight, but because they were petrified. And with the only adult in the car leaving them, they were now absolutely helpless. Then, The Rex moved towards the Explorer with Alan and Ian inside. It stood in front of it, then roared defiantly. Are we in some sort of danger here? Ian whispered. It seems to be challenging us. Beads of sweat were running down Ian's face. He too was becoming panicked. Alan took a second to respond, then made eye contact with Ian. I think it thinks we're a threat. Well, this is just peachy, Malcolm muttered, his voice lacking its usual theatrical flair. A power failure in a park housing literal prehistoric monsters. One would almost think someone intentionally sabotaged the infrastructure, but then, who would be so foolish? Alan Grant ignored him, his gaze fixed on the behemoth right in front of them. And again, the Tyrannosaur roared with a terrifying dominance. Then a low, guttural rumble that vibrated through the very chassis of the vehicle. It sent a shiver down both grown men's spines. The animal began to nudge the car. The Explorer groaned, the metal screeching as it shifted toward the edge of the embankment. To the right of where the tour cars had stopped was a 40-foot drop into the paddock interior. We need to get out of this thing, Alan stated, his voice low and urgent. Ian raised an eyebrow, a flicker of his old self returning. And where, pray tell, do you propose we go? Into its welcoming jaws. I was rather hoping for a more civilized demise. Alan yelled to get out as the Tyrannosaur planted its foot down on the roof, shattering the plexiglass and missing them by mere feet. Gennaro. Grant sputtered. He went to the bathroom up the road, his eyes darting towards the small, isolated structure, visible through the rain. We have to try and get to it. It's a shelter. We need to get the kids to safety. Ian looked at the Rex, then to Alan, and nodded. He understood the assignment. You go and get the kids, he said. I think I have an idea to distract it. Lex whimpered, her small hand clutching Tim's arm. Tim, however, was looking through the rain with the night vision goggles. What do you see, Timmy? Lex asked, shaking her older brother's arm. Tim strained his eyes. The weight of the goggles made it almost impossible for him to see straight. Tim had to do a double take, it's Dr. Grant, and that other guy that Grandpa hates. They're outside of the tool car. The Tyrannosaur had not noticed either of the adults exit the vehicle. She was too focused on demolishing her new rival. What do you mean? She asked. Are they stupid enough to try and fight it? Tim ignored her and noticed Dr. Grant running towards them. Ian pulled out a flare gun he had acquired from the tour car emergency kit. Alan got the hint and started to run for the first tour car, losing his hat in the process. The Tyrannosaur noticed his movement and roared in defiance to him. The ground beneath vibrated, another deafening roar, a sound that ripped through his very reality. It was raw, untamed power. Ian yelled at the Rex in a demand for attention. He shot the flare straight up into the tropical, stormy sky. The Rex noticed, it saw Ian and gave chase. Oh shit, Ian muttered. He was now running in the opposite direction from Alan and the kids. Alan got to the first tour car. He opened the door and commanded the kids. The bathroom, he said. Quick, we have to go. Grant, witnessing Ian's abrupt and decisive action, understood the rationale instantly. Staying put was death. Running, however perilous, offered a chance. He looked at Lex and Tim, whose eyes were wide with terror. He assured them it was all going to be fine, as long as they get away before it notices them. Tim surprisingly reacted, his hands fumbling for the night vision goggles, which he retrieved just as Grant hauled Lex over the seats. Run, Tim, to the bathroom hut. They ran, the road smooth, which offered more of a chance for anyone to fall. Grant held Lexi's arm, hauling her forward. They dare not look back. The dash through the downpour was a blur of primal fear and adrenaline. The ground beneath them trembled with each of the Tyrannosaur's thunderous steps. Alan shielded Lex as they ran, his scientific mind momentarily subsumed by the overwhelming instinct to protect. The Tyrannosaur, her attention momentarily focused on the fleeing figure of Ian Malcolm in front of her. They scrambled into the restroom hut, just as Gennaro was trying to latch the door of the middle stall. The lawyer looked like a cornered rat, his breath coming in jagged sobs. "You brought it here," Gennaro wailed. "You'll bring it right to us." Grant snapped and demanded Gennaro to shut his mouth and not to say a word. He shuffled Tim and Lex into the corner of the hut, beside the concrete partition of the sinks. "Stay down, kids. Just stay there. If we stay still, it can't find us." Alan stood by the entrance door, peering out as to try and get a handle on the situation. The rain lashed his face as he strained his eyes. But it was no good. He couldn't see much of anything. Alan asked Tim to hand him the night vision goggles, and Tim did so without hesitation. Now, in a tint of green, Alan could see the Tyrannosaur about 100 yards away down the road, giving chase to Malcolm. Malcolm ran as fast as he could, but his lungs were burning and legs starting to give. The Tyrannosaur was almost right on him. That's when Ian did something desperate. Malcolm, in a last-ditch effort with the last of his energy, decided to jump the large concrete base of the fence. He hoisted himself onto the concrete structure, one of the large pylons dwarfing him in size. He then jumped inside the enclosure and diving under a nearby fern for cover. The Tyrannosaur looked visibly angry, with violent head shakes and growling. She had lost her prey. She bellowed. She was pissed off and loose. Nothing to hold her back. She oozed absolute dominance and unrivaled strength. All anyone could do was hide. Then she stopped. Her large head shifted, and with a deathly stare, she was looking directly at Ian hiding. It was so sudden, even in the heavy downpour, even with the rain masking his scent. She could still detect him. And then it happened. With a terrifying ferocity, she lunged forward, her mouth wide, and snatched Ian Malcolm by his legs. He screamed in shock. His arms wailed. She had him. He was in the mouth of the world's most powerful predator the planet had ever seen. And then he was gone. The Tyrannosaur swallowed him whole. Alan Grant couldn't believe what he had just witnessed. He turned to the kids, then to Gennaro, who was peeking through the stall door. "He's gone, isn't he?" Gennaro said. But Alan said nothing and peered back outside. The scene was utter chaos. A park-wide power outage, a loose adult pissed off Tyrannosaurus, and the death of Ian Malcolm. Then a loud booming sound, and then another. What Alan saw made his blood run cold. The Rex. She was heading right for their thatched hiding place. Alan wondered if she somehow seen Gennaro escape earlier. Was her mind sharper than previously thought? Alan commanded the kids, and especially Gennaro, to be quiet and to not move an inch. The hut shuddered violently. A low growl, impossibly close, reverberated through the very foundations of the structure. She was outside, investigating. Alan could feel the vibrations through the soles of his shoes, through the wall against his back. Tim, clutching his sister's hand, looked up at Dr. Grant, his young face etched with fear, but also a nascent understanding. He seemed to grasp the gravity of Dr. Grant's command. He nodded, pressing himself flatter against the wall. Lex shrieked, startling everyone, but Tim held his hand over her mouth. Loud booming sounds, like the thunder itself, echoed from outside. The Tyrannosaur was circling them, its massive claws testing the ground, its head likely low, sniffing. The hut was essentially a scent marker for the creature now. Its keen olfactory senses, honed over millions of years of evolution, would be working overtime. From the stall, Gennaro's whimpers escalated into a choked sob. He was losing control. The Rex moved closer, its breathing a deep, resonant rumble that shook the very air within the small building. Gennaro had reached the limit of his endurance. He saw the beast's head past the doorframe. He saw the gore dripping from its chin. The lawyer's mind snapped. He bolted from the stall, trying to push past Grant to get to the door. "Stay down," Grant hissed, grabbing Gennaro's arm. "Let go of me. We're dead if we stay here." Gennaro lunged forward, his feet splashing in the puddles on the restroom floor. The Rex head whipped around. The movement was too much for the creature's predatory instincts to ignore. It didn't even use its full body. It simply thrust its snout through the thatch and timber of the restroom's front facade. The structure exploded outward. Beams snapped like toothpicks. Gennaro was caught in the middle of the floor, frozen in the sudden exposure to the elements. He looked up, his eyes wide behind his glasses, as the roof disappeared above him. The Rex didn't wait. It dipped its head, its neck muscles bulging, and snatched Gennaro directly off the floor. The lawyer was lifted into the air, his legs kicking uselessly. A single, powerful snap of the jaws silenced him forever. Grant grabbed Tim and Lex, pulling them into the corner of the stall furthest away. "Stay absolutely still," Grant whispered. His heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The Rex stood over the ruins of the restroom, the rain sluicing off its pebbled skin. It huffed, a massive gust of hot, carnivorous breath that smelled of old blood and fermented protein. It swung its head back and forth, the snout passing inches from Grant's face. Grant could see the individual scales and scars, probably from fighting with the fence, the way the nictitating membrane flickered over the eye. He didn't blink. He didn't breathe. In Tim's hands, the night vision goggles hummed softly. Lex was buried in Grant's side, her eyes squeezed shut. The Rex stayed for what felt like an eternity. It was confused. The movement had ceased. The heat signatures were muffled by the rain and the cooling concrete. Finally, with a frustrated rumble, the creature turned. It was attracted by a new sound, the distant, rhythmic clatter of a high-performance internal combustion engine. Far down the road, two beams of light pierced the darkness. Robert Muldoon's Jeep Wrangler skidded around the bend. Muldoon was at the wheel, his face set in a grim mask of professional focus. Beside him sat Ellie Sattler, her eyes wide with terror as she saw the wreckage of the explorers. "Muldoon," Grant roared, breaking cover the moment the Rex tail vanished into the tree line. "Over here." Muldoon slammed on the brakes, the Jeep fishtailing in the mud. He didn't waste time with questions. He saw the blood. He saw the ruins of the restroom. "Where's Malcolm?" Muldoon shouted over the storm. "Gone," Grant said, his voice hollow. "Gennaro too." Grant lifted Lex and Tim into the back of the open-top Jeep. Ellie reached back, pulling them onto the seat. Grant scrambled in after them. Muldoon slammed the Jeep into reverse, just as a deafening roar erupted from the jungle to their left. The Tyrannosaurus had circled back, realizing its prey was escaping. It burst through the foliage, 30 feet of apex predator in a full sprint. "Bloody hell," Muldoon muttered. He jammed the shifter into first and floored it. The Jeep's tires spun for a second, catching purchase on the slick road. They surged forward. The Rex was capable of reaching speeds of nearly 32 miles per hour. Its stride was massive, each step covering the distance of the Jeep's entire wheelbase. Muldoon was working the gearbox with surgical precision, keeping the engine in the power band despite the slick conditions. The Rex was gaining. Its head was level with the back of the Jeep, its jaws snapping at the air just feet behind Grant's head. Grant grabbed a heavy flashlight from the floor of the Jeep. He didn't use it as a light. He waited until the Rex snout was inches away and hurled the heavy metal casing with all his might. It struck the creature's sensitive nostrils. The Rex roared in pain and indignation, losing its footing for a fraction of a second. That was the window Muldoon needed. He hit a straight stretch of the road where the drainage was better, and the Jeep finally pulled away. The predator didn't give up immediately. It followed them for another half-mile, its silhouette appearing in the flashes of lightning like a recurring ghost. But eventually, the disparity between biological endurance and mechanical power favored the Jeep. The Rex roars faded into the distance, dampened by the relentless rain. The interior of the Jeep was silent, save for the heavy breathing of its occupants, the engine of the Jeep, and the sounds of the tropical storm. Grant looked at Tim and Lex. They were huddled together, covered in mud and the fine white dust of pulverized concrete. Tim still had the goggles. He was staring at them, his thumbs tracing the plastic casing. "You okay, kid?" Grant asked. Tim looked up. The trauma was there, etched into the lines of his young face. But there was something else, too. A realization of the world's true nature. "It was bigger than the books said," he whispered. "The books don't talk about the smell." "No," Grant agreed with a smirk. The drive back to the visitor center was an exercise in tension. Muldoon drove with his lights on high beam, his hand never leaving the gear shift. He knew the park's lay, out better than anyone. He knew that the Rex was only one of 28 species that were now potentially roaming free. The fences are down across the entire northern sector, Muldoon said, his voice tight. The computer system is a total loss. Arnold is trying to reboot, but without the master override, we're flying blind. What about the velociraptors? Grant asked. Muldoon flicked a glance at him. The raptor fences are on a different substation. They should still have power, assuming the surge didn't fry their logic controllers. They reached the perimeter of the visitor center. The massive wooden gates, designed to evoke a sense of adventure, now looked like the entrance to a tomb. They passed through the open main entrance for the park's vehicle tour and drove straight to the visitor center front entrance. The Jeep screeched to a halt. The emergency lights of the center flickered with an unsteady, sickly yellow glow. As they climbed out, the heavy doors of the center swung open. John Hammond stepped out. He looked smaller than he had that morning. His white linen suit was wrinkled, and his straw hat was gone. He looked like an old man who had finally realized his toy box was full of scorpions. "Tim, Lex," Hammond cried out, his voice cracking. The children didn't wait. They sprinted up the concrete steps and threw themselves into their grandfather's arms. Hammond collapsed to his knees, clutching them to his chest. He was sobbing, a dry, racking sound of a man who had nearly lost everything. "I am so sorry," Hammond whispered into Lexi's hair. "I'm so sorry." Grant stood by the Jeep beside Ellie, her hand clutching his, watching the reunion. Alan felt a different hand on his shoulder. It was Muldoon. "We need to get inside," the warden said. "The perimeter isn't secure, and the wind is picking up. If the raptor fences fail, this building is just a glass cage." Grant nodded. He looked back toward the dark wall of the jungle. Somewhere out there, the queen of the island was claiming her kingdom.